Jean-Pierre Diouf is an accomplished businessman, a visionary entrepreneur who has risen to the pinnacle of success through determination and sound management. The owner of a thriving supermarket chain, which he built with his own hands, he embodies the ideal of an entrepreneur who started with nothing but, through hard work and strategy, created an empire. His reputation extends far beyond the city's borders, and his name is synonymous with success across the country. However, despite the recognition he has garnered, Jean-Pierre remains a man of great humility and exemplary discretion. He avoids the spotlight, preferring to let his accomplishments speak for themselves. Rather than seeking adulation, he keeps his feet on the ground and prefers to work in the shadows, away from the media. Recently, he opened a new branch in a large suburb, a sizable supermarket that quickly became an important shopping hub. Although the branch had been open for several months, Jean-Pierre had not yet had the chance to visit the location. He had left his teams on site to manage daily operations, as he always does, but today is different. This morning, dressed simply in jeans and a t-shirt, a wardrobe choice reflecting his desire for discretion, he decides that it is time to see how his business operates without his direct influence. He wants to observe, objectively and without interference, the impact of his business model. No one on the team knows him personally, as he has always taken care to stay behind his managers and executives, leaving them the responsibility of handling operations. His employees do not know what he truly looks like, and this is part of his strategy to see the real face of his company, without the recognition of his name disturbing the reality of things. As he arrives in front of the supermarket, Jean-Pierre immediately feels the curious gazes turning toward him. His laid-back appearance does not go unnoticed. Quite the opposite. He can feel the eyes of customers and employees scrutinizing his silhouette. A black man, simply dressed, in a neighborhood where social appearances are often carefully managed. This image does not fit with the idea they have of success, and Jean-Pierre instinctively senses a form of suspicion in their gaze. These reactions are not new to him. He has experienced them several times throughout his career, but today, for a reason he struggles to define, they seem to affect him more deeply. Perhaps it is the loneliness that often accompanies success, or maybe the even sharper contrast with the image of success tied to well-established social codes. Entering the store, he finds himself in a space where every product, every shelf, every aisle tells a story. But he is not there to analyze the products. He wants to see how his team manages the atmosphere, how the customers react to the environment he has shaped. A young employee, visibly uncomfortable in the face of this stranger who seems out of place, rushes toward him with a question that betrays his unease. "Sir, may I help you?" he asks, his voice polite but tinged with palpable suspicion, as if doubting this man's place in this space. Jean-Pierre, always calm and measured, responds in a quiet tone. "No, thank you, I don't need anything." His answer is short and simple, but enough to prevent the employee from walking away immediately. Instead of retreating, the employee stays on alert, discreetly watching Jean-Pierre's every movement. At every aisle Jean-Pierre examines, the employee is there, standing just close enough not to be too intrusive, but near enough that his presence does not go unnoticed. Jean-Pierre is used to this kind of behavior, but he cannot prevent a slight irritation from rising within him. His observations continue, but he begins to feel an increasing discomfort. The gaze of other customers intensifies. He can hear a few murmurs, quiet exchanges, but with significant meaning. The customers judge him silently. To them, he is a modest man, too simple, too ordinary to be a supermarket owner. They do not associate him with the success he represents. They only see a man who seems to have lost his place in a setting where appearance and social status play a key role. As he stops in front of a shelf, lost in his thoughts, the store manager, alerted by his employees' concerns, decides to intervene. This man, in his 40s, well-dressed and exuding a certain arrogance, strides confidently toward Jean-Pierre. Without even speaking, he gives Jean-Pierre a quick once-over, as if trying to figure out who this stranger is who dares to wander through his supermarket. "Sir, you know that our products here are quite exclusive, don't you?" he says in a condescending tone, ready to put this man in his place. Jean-Pierre, although irritated by the manager's attitude, remains calm. He meets the manager's gaze and responds with measured tranquility, but underlying firmness. Is there a problem? His question, simple but direct, echoes the manager's attitude, and the manager seems surprised by his calmness. His gaze hardens, his suspicion growing. The manager, still unable to comprehend why such a simple-looking man would dare to walk around in a place he considers reserved for a more appropriate clientele, is growing increasingly agitated. To him, such an image does not match what he believes to be the profile of a worthy customer or owner. He had expected to see a man in a suit, with manners more fitting for the stature he imagined someone of this caliber should possess. Jean-Pierre continues his visit, his calm, measured footsteps echoing on the store's tile floor, while the manager, though visibly annoyed, tries to maintain an imposing presence beside him. Jean-Pierre walks without hurry to the wine and champagne section, a prestigious and delicate part of the supermarket, where rare and expensive bottles are proudly displayed like treasures out of reach for most customers. He stops in front of a shelf of Chateau Margaux, one of the most sought-after wines in the world. The bottle that catches his eye is a 1982 vintage, one of the most exceptional ever produced. Jean-Pierre lets his gaze linger on the bottle for a moment, appreciating the elegance of the label, the reflection of the glass, the history contained in every drop of this rare nectar. Without hesitation, he reaches for the bottle, but before he can touch it, the manager intervenes abruptly, stepping directly in front of him, as if to block his path. "Excuse me, sir," he says sharply, almost authoritatively. "This wine is very rare and expensive. Are you sure you want to handle it?" His eyes betray an obvious contempt, as if he feels compelled to protect the precious item from someone he deems unworthy of approaching it. Jean-Pierre, though surprised by this intervention, remains calm and composes his face with apparent serenity. Slowly, he lowers his hand, pulling it away from the wine as if he never intended to touch it. Then, turning slowly toward the manager, he fixes him with an intense gaze that unsettles the man. "Do you really think I can't afford it?" he asks, his voice calm but tinged with defiance. The manager, caught off guard by this direct question, stands silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. His eyes briefly drop, searching for his words, before he tries to justify himself. "That's not what I meant, sir. It's just that." He stops mid-sentence, desperately trying to mask his discomfort, but his efforts are obvious. Jean-Pierre, unrelenting, waits patiently for the manager to finish his thought. The manager, clearly uncomfortable under Jean-Pierre's piercing gaze, continues, but this time his voice betrays a palpable nervousness. "The champagne you're holding," he says in a slightly trembling voice, pointing to another bottle nearby, "costs over $200,000. Perhaps you're looking for a bottle that's more affordable?" His emphasis on the word affordable is no accident. It's a clumsy attempt to make it clear to Jean-Pierre that his place is not among such objects of extreme luxury. Jean-Pierre slowly places the bottle back on the shelf, his movements measured but tinged with tension. He does not take his eyes off the manager, who, in turn, seems increasingly frustrated by the unyielding demeanor of his interlocutor. "I'm fully aware of the price, and I can assure you I have no problem affording it," Jean-Pierre responds, his calm nearly icy. His patience, which has so far been infinite, begins to crack under the pressure of the manager's insidious judgment. But the manager, visibly unable to relax, decides to escalate his aggression even further. He makes a quick gesture toward one of the employees, Marie, who is nearby, watching the scene nervously. "Marie, call the police immediately," he orders sharply, his voice full of certainty. "We have a theft attempt in progress." At those words, the world around Jean-Pierre seems to stop. A shiver of indignation runs through his body, but he remains still, almost stoic. The murmur of the customers intensifies around him. He can feel their incredulous and suspicious gazes turning toward him. He senses the silent judgments of these people who now see him as a criminal, an imposter, a potential thief, simply because of his modest appearance. Yet, inwardly, he refuses to be consumed by anger. He is above all of this, and he knows it. Still, a spark of defiance glints in his eyes. Do you really think you can accuse me of theft without any proof? Jean-Pierre asks, his voice firm but calm, laced with a spark of defiance. Simply because I don't fit your image of what a rich man should be. His words hang heavily in the air, full of meaning. He is denouncing the monstrosity of social prejudice and stereotypes that have led him to be treated this way. The manager, though nervous, does not back down. He seems convinced of his right, persuaded that his judgment is justified and that he has only been protecting his luxury products from someone he deems an intruder. Jean-Pierre knows he doesn't have to justify himself. This absurd and degrading situation speaks for itself. But he also understands that this is an opportunity to make a statement and call out the absurdity of the world in which he operates. A few minutes later, the police arrive, their uniforms striking against the tense scene. The customers, like spectators of an unfolding drama, watch the scene with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Marie stands next to the manager, visibly nervous and uneasy. One of the officers, a tall and calm man, approaches Jean-Pierre cautiously. "Sir, we've been informed of a problem here. Can you explain what's going on?" he asks politely, but with a certain reserve, as if he's not entirely sure of the situation. Jean-Pierre crosses his arms, a gesture that conveys his resolve and calm in the face of the absurdity unfolding around him. He looks from the officer to the manager, and when he speaks, his voice leaves no doubt about his dignity. "Yes, I'm here in my own supermarket, and I'm being accused of theft without any valid reason." His words drop into the heavy air of the room, clear and unyielding. The officer, surprised, raises an eyebrow and turns to the manager, perplexed. "Your supermarket?" he asks, his tone now tinged with doubt. At that moment, the manager bursts out in a mocking laugh, a forced and nervous laugh that echoes through the space like a desperate attempt to maintain his authority. He can't admit the mistake he's made, and he seems entirely convinced of his version of events, even though it is clearly absurd. "Your supermarket? And I'm the President of the United States," the manager exclaims, a sarcastic smile stretching across his face. He is visibly convinced that Jean-Pierre is lying to get out of an embarrassing situation, a last-ditch effort to hold on to his authority in the face of a truth that is slipping away. He waits to see if Jean-Pierre will crack, if he will lose his composure. But Jean-Pierre, relentless, shows no sign of wavering. With calm assurance, Jean-Pierre pulls out his phone from his pocket, scrolling through documents with measured movements. He holds the device out to the officer, who takes it hesitantly at first, then examines it carefully. The eyes of the scene are fixed on this moment, the tension palpable. The officer scrutinizes the phone screen, his eyes locking onto the evidence displayed clearly, legal documents, contracts, and company information. Jean-Pierre is indeed the owner of the supermarket chain, and every line of the documents confirms it beyond a shadow of a doubt. The officer's expression shifts from skepticism to astonishment as he nods slowly, incredulously. The officer then hands the device to the manager, who, as soon as he sees the information on the screen, loses all composure. His face freezes, turning pale with horror, and he is left speechless. Stupefaction takes over him, his initial arrogance transforming into a public shame he never anticipated. The silence that follows is thick with meaning. Around him, the murmurs of the customers, who had been uncertain until now, grow louder. The gaze of the onlookers slowly turns toward the manager, some with curiosity, others with disdain. The manager, pale, stammers apologies that fall flat. He tries to defend himself, to rationalize his behavior, but his words are incoherent, almost inaudible. I'm sorry, sir. I had no idea. I didn't think that. His apologies fade into the air, futile and lacking conviction. Jean-Pierre, not allowing himself to be disturbed by this disordered litany, calmly cuts him off, his gaze piercing like an arrow. "You didn't think, that's right. You judged me solely based on my appearance, and you acted with arrogance and prejudice," he says, his voice slicing through the silence. His words resonate in the space, highlighting the foolishness of the manager's actions. The gravity of the situation is no longer up for debate, and shame begins to envelop the manager, who lowers his head under Jean-Pierre's piercing gaze. The police officers, having understood that the situation has taken an irreversible turn, quietly withdraw, not wishing to interfere further. It is now clear that there was no attempt at theft, but a serious error in judgment. Jean-Pierre doesn't just call out the manager's attitude. He challenges the entire concept of respect and responsibility within the workplace. There was no attempt at theft, he continues firmly. Only a glaring lack of professionalism and a serious misjudgment. His words fall like heavy stones into the water, disturbing the fragile balance of the manager. The customers, who had watched the scene with curiosity bordering on discomfort, now exchange shocked glances. Some avert their eyes, unable to bear the weight of the manager's shame, while others watch the scene with clear expressions of disapproval. A collective awareness emerges. The injustice has been revealed, and in this stand, Jean-Pierre has not only corrected a mistake, but exposed the flaws of the system. Marie, the employee who had been so quick to call the police, timidly approaches Jean-Pierre. She seems shaken by what she has done, aware that her decision was influenced by misguided orders. With a trembling voice, she apologizes. "I'm sorry, sir. I should never have." Her words are filled with shame and regret, and she stands there, head lowered, eyes fixed on the floor. Jean-Pierre, without losing his dignity, gives a slight nod, signaling that he accepts her apology without making a scene. But his gaze never leaves the manager, whose agony is now palpable. Jean-Pierre remains silent for a moment, his eyes still locked on the manager. Then, with a firm and measured voice, he addresses him. "You not only disrespected a customer, but you also failed in your duty as the manager of this store. You are no longer in a position to lead here." His voice leaves no room for discussion. There is no place left for arrogance or ignorance. Jean-Pierre, with unwavering serenity, prepares to make an irrevocable decision. The manager, frozen, tries to articulate a few words, but his mind is too disturbed to find any coherent defense. Finally, after a moment of hesitation, he weakly protests. "You can't. It's a mistake." His voice betrays his distress and panic. It is clear that he is about to lose everything. Jean-Pierre, still impassive, cuts him off. "You've already had all the chances," he retorts, his tone unshakable. "You made a choice today, and that choice has consequences." He lets these words hang in the air like a condemnation. Marie, still a little shaken, stands at a distance. She knows she could have acted differently, that she acted out of conformity rather than personal judgment. But Jean-Pierre, with a compassionate look, offers her some comfort. "You can stay, Marie. Your mistake was following orders, but you still have the chance to do better." His voice, softer now, reflects the understanding he has for the young employee, whose role was manipulated by a flawed hierarchy. The manager, completely disoriented, finally realizes the extent of the situation. He makes one last attempt to reach out to Jean-Pierre, but Jean-Pierre, without a second glance, turns and calmly walks toward the store's exit. No words are exchanged, but every movement of Jean-Pierre's is filled with a silent dignity that crushes everything around him. A heavy silence settles over the supermarket. A silence so thick, it feels almost palpable, as if reality itself has just been reconfigured by what just transpired. The customers, still in shock, exchange concerned glances. Some whisper among themselves, while others wonder if they've just witnessed an authentic scene, or if it was all just a strange dream. As Jean-Pierre heads for the exit, he leaves behind a dismissed manager, a disrupted sales floor, and an unshakable lesson. Appearance never defines the worth of a man. Whether by wealth or status, what truly matters is the respect one must grant to others, no matter their appearance. This day served as a reminder to all that hasty judgments can have dramatic consequences, and that integrity and dignity are values that far exceed anything that can be measured in money or status.